So just a few words from me to echo what Nazanin said. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be here in a room full of people that care about prisoners abroad. We had, over our years, many contacts with prisoners abroad, and many of the families that we worked with were supported by you guys. So it's nice to be here as a retired campaigner and to be a happy ending. Just a few words, really. I wanted to talk a bit about the experience on the outside, what it's like as a family member, and what it's like afterwards. Our story obviously is quite public. We were on the television a lot. I got quite angry and confident and pointed in my campaigning. It started in disorientation and confusion, as it always does. I remember being completely bewildered when I got a phone call from Nazanin's family to say that she'd been arrested at the airport. It didn't make any sense to me, and obviously I knew Iran to be a place that is politically sensitive and volatile, and everyone knows to sort of step away from the red lines. So it made still no sense as to why a mum on holiday with a baby would have been abducted. None of our family understood. Anyone we told didn't understand, and lots of people would sort of call us to try and make sense of why and what. So, like many other families, we turned to the government, turned to the Foreign Office for help and for expertise. I feel the Foreign Office is very good at projecting a sense of expertise, but in our case, they didn't really know what was going on. It was a new embassy. It had been closed down for a while. They couldn't really help us with a lawyer. They just seemed pleased that Iran had even acknowledged that Nazanin had been arrested and that she was being held. I found in our case there was a real, what we would call as accounting, an expectations gap. So I kind of thought the job of the government was to help Nazanin come home. They thought their job was to give me a cup of tea and some sympathy. It was a tragedy, but it was kind of initially at the beginning our problem, not theirs. And they didn't dispute it was an injustice, but they didn't want to make it a diplomatic incident. I think for me it was a shock to realise it's an area of government policy that's completely discretionary. So the government can do something if it wants to. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And so we had to push the government very hard, push ministers very hard to acknowledge the outrageousness of our case. And they would continually try and manage us and manage our expectations on what the embassy could do, which meant it always felt like it was this sort of battle where they were trying to normalise what Iran was doing, and we were having to bang on the door and bang on any drum. That's partly why we ended up campaigning. And as Nazanin alluded to, an awful lot of people in this room and beyond helped us in different ways with our campaigning. Partly, it was to make some noise. I wanted the government to act. I wanted them to feel like it was their problem too, which is why we got very critical, and I was very critical of the government in lots of ways. And there's been recently a drama about our story that's been on BBC One that some of you may have seen. It's quite an unflattering portrait of the minister and of the government. And I have had the minister get in touch and say, listen, is that really fair, mate? Because yes, it was fair, but it was also a shock that it could be that, I don't know, aloof, distant and experienced at the beginning. I think the other reason for campaigning is the one that Nazanin's alluded to. I think there's a lot to be said that publicity helps minimise an injustice. I thought she'd be safer in Iran if everyone knew about her case, that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And as we've seen, again, just recently, the worst abuses always happen in the darkness, wherever you are in the world. As many of you will know, it turned out to be a very long battle in our case. I thought we just needed to get a few newspaper articles and shout a bit, but I was 6 years of campaigning and ended up doing some very extreme things. 2 hunger strikes, lots of legal actions, lots of trips to the UN, involved with many other families, and ended up becoming an unexpected troublemaker in lots of ways. There's often a way, and it's true in our story, that the focus can end up being on sort of the main characters. Of course, a prison story, an overseas prison story, but a domestic one as well, impacts a whole family. And one of the things that I think became clear for us, probably more so when Nazanin came home, is how each family member inhabits quite different realities. Prison is hard, and by definition it's isolating, and it's really hard to know exactly what's happening on the other side of the wall. So we ended up going through quite different survival journeys for those inside and outside, lots of suffering in silence, and lots not being shareable for different reasons. One of the great truths of life, of course, is that life goes on. And for those who are outside, partly dysfunctionally you're trying to keep life going, partly you're feeling guilty that you're not doing more, partly you're not knowing what to do, and that powerlessness that many families have about pushing the government, talking to the media, just trying to get things sent, is an experience that has all sorts of debilitating consequences. So it does leave a trauma, and it does leave a trauma that's different for all of us in different ways. I think overseas imprisonment for everyone in the family is unsafe, and there are lots of unseen struggles that, and in our case, lots of selective seeing, like things you notice, things you don't notice until it's afterwards, until it's safe to notice. Some of the quieter impact can take a while to share, and some of the tacit assumptions can play out quite bumpily afterwards. So certainly we've had our own sort of Humpty Dumpty period, if that makes sense, of putting the pieces back together. And we each needed to make our own worlds safe in different ways, and to trigger, and we could each trigger each other in the ways in which it wasn't safe. So we used to have these battles over tidying the house. So Nazanin came back with a really strong association between cleanliness and safety, and not having uncharted parts of the middle bedroom or whatever. Whereas I had a really strong sense of coping in compartments and just not having to deal with nonsense that didn't need dealing with, which could cause us some quite fractious moments, just piles of mail and so on. I think the other thing to point out is it's disorienting for children. There's often an instinct to try and protect your children in a situation like ours, and many families don't share where mummy is or daddy is. We didn't tell Gabriella when she was tiny where mummy was. She got told that mummy was at university, which she'd get quite impatient with. And then it became clear that we were talking in code pointlessly when she was taken to the park and was asked by her mum in the park, "Oh, where's your mummy?" And she said, "Oh, she's in prison," said Gabriella. Mother-in-law came over and explained it wasn't like what you thought. There's often also a lot of confusion about when is it going to end and why and what's happened. And certainly in our house, we mistakenly, two things. One, when Gabriella came back to the UK, and she came back a little bit before Nazanin, we gave her a dolly, which we said was magic dolly. Someone had given to me in the hunger strike, and if you cuddled it every night and wished, then wishes would come true. And one of them she wished for was a box of Lego, and it did indeed deliver the box of Lego. The second one was for mummy to come home, and that was all well and good, and it wasn't clear when Magic Dolly delivered, but she kept on cuddling her. But we did, at the end of Nazanin's sentence, she alluded to, at the end of her sentence, she was given a second one. Towards the end of her sentence, we did a countdown where we would strike off the days, a bit like a reverse advent calendar, until we got down to zero. And it was very disorienting for Gabrielle when we got to the end. And then she'd cuddled Magic Dolly, and the countdown didn't work. And she was a very quiet little girl at school for a few weeks trying to make sense. And it's one of those things where this is a situation that is outside of your parents' control, and outside of the wider family's control. And it makes for a very disorienting sense as you try and make sense of the world. Which, again, when you're 2, you don't in the same way, but when you're 7, you've certainly got a moral sense of it. I think, just to end, there's probably 2 reflections I'd want to leave with you. I do think the work of Prisoners Abroad and other organisations is really important. The world feels, to me at least, like it's getting bumpier. Prison is growing, unfair imprisonment is growing, hostage-taking is growing. There are lots of important things to do to make it safer, or as much as possible. But there's probably 2 simpler reflections that I think are central to the work that you guys do. First is the importance of hope. I think when I started campaigning, I thought it was a soapbox. You just needed to stand up and shout and get people's attention. It's not. I think for me the most important part of campaigning by the end was the belief that life can be different. It was the importance of keeping the light on and keeping hope alive. Prison for everyone is life-changing, but it doesn't have to be a death sentence. And when you come out, it does take time to look forward again, and it is important that there are organisations there that help you reach out and reach and find a better tomorrow. And the second point is about connections. As Nazanin mentioned, an awful lot of people in this room and beyond connected to us and helped us come home. And I always say that it wasn't the campaigning that got us Nazanin home. It was the people that listened and the people that cared. Prison is by definition a very isolating experience for the whole family. And it is important to break that isolation. The importance of sending gifts, of not letting someone feel alone and not feeling abandoned is really central during the imprisonment. But also when you come out of prison, it does take time to reconnect and to end the estrangement and to become part of a community again. And it takes time for the family outside to accept it's a new normal and that we've all changed. And we all need people to help us get through a prison experience. We all enter it on our own, but we survive it together. We often say that freedom is not an island, it is something shared. So it's nice to be standing here as a happy ending, and also to remember that life after prison is a happy beginning, and that stories like ours are a second chance at life. So thank you all for helping us be part of ours.